chordates, right? So like mammals, fish, reptiles, amphibians are all chordates. And so what they have in common is they have this dorsal nerve cord. And there are two subgroups or subphylum. There's the invertebrate chordates, or called hemichordates, and they have something called a notochord, which is sort of a dorsal stiffening. Remember, the dorsal is the back. Your ventral side is your tummy side. Your dorsal side is your back. And so those graptolites that I talked about, these are planktonic hemichordates. So they're related actually to the vertebrates in that, but they're planktonic, right? And also there are these tunicates. Tunicates are the sea squirts. So sea squirts, they're related to vertebrates as well because their larval stages look like little fish, but then they become colonial. So graptolites and the tunicates, again, dorsal stiffening. But the vast majority of chordates are going to be the vertebrates. And the key thing about the vertebrates is they have the bone, a backbone that surrounds a nerve cord. Because if you injure your nerve cord, you're going to be paralyzed, right? So the backbone is important to help protect that nerve cord. So fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals. All right, so continuing on, the next part here deals with the fossil record. And so how did life begin? Well, there's been lots of experiments that have had interesting results, and the process is called abiogenesis. So leading to life just through chemical processes, right? So some chemical reactions lead to a living organism. So some chemical soup. In fact, that's the quote unquote primordial soup of life, right? And one thing that experiments have done, especially this Stanley Miller and Urey, in the 1950s, University of Chicago, they did an experiment where they took ingredients or chemical elements that were around in the early Earth: water, carbon dioxide, methane gas, ammonia gas, NH4 is ammonia, and some electricity. There are probably cosmic rays or electrical lightning flashes. So they combined all these in a vessel, and after a few days, they produce amino acids. Amino acids are not life, but these are the building blocks, right? So life obviously a little bit more complicated. But the other thing is that the ratios of amino acids they found were just what you'd expect in real organic systems. What's more, we also find amino acids on meteorites that have landed on Earth, and those then the ratios of those amino acids are just like the ones Miller and Urey produced back in the 1950s, right? Which are, again, building blocks for life. Now, if we go back to our fossil record, remember the first chemical evidence, and remember this is that biomarker using the carbon isotopes, the 13 carbon to 12 carbon. So that biomarker suggests that life might have formed right around 3.7 billion years old. There was a new study that just came out this year in these zircon crystals where they found inclusions of carbon, and those inclusions in the zircon again had this biomarker suggesting that the carbon was made by a photosynthetic organism, and those zircons date to 4.1 billion years old. So there's some chemical evidence, but certainly by 2.5 billion years ago, we start seeing quite a bit of more fossil evidence, mostly soft-bodied organisms. By about 1 billion years ago, we see sea anemones, jellyfish, sea pens, a variety of soft-bodied organisms. And then by 542, that's that Cambrian explosion, right? The radiation of life. And then we see these shelly fossils. So really life developed shells. And the hypothesis is that during just the time just before this 42 million years is called the Ediacara fauna from the Ediacara Mountains in Australia. And these are all soft-bodied. And they date from anywhere from around 600 million years to about 542 million years ago. In fact, let's emphasize this MA. MA is mega years. And so mega years is 1 times 10 to the 6 years. So that's millions. So we're looking at millions of years here. So remember, GA is billions, MA is millions. So during this time, there was lots of soft-bodied fossils, but there was lots of predators. And so the prey had to develop a defense mechanism, right? So so often, anytime before the Cambrian is called the Precambrian. So this refers to Precambrian, right? So the Cambrian is the first evidence of abundant fossils, right? The shells. And so the Precambrian, we had this Ediacaran fauna, right? So lots of predators. So somehow the prey had to develop a defense. And so when you just see the C like this means Cambrian, right? So that's an abbreviation for the Cambrian period, which is the first period of our Phanerozoic time. So again, the fossil record is incomplete. It's, because let's say an organism is buried, but then erosion could wipe that organism away. We'll never find it, right? So paleontologists have not closely examined all the rocks on Earth, right? There's still plenty of places to look. Not all organisms represented in the rock record, because all organisms have a good enough preservation rate. And then environments could be stripped away, eroded away, right? So you have to have the right environment for deposition. One thing that Darwin did, he went on this voyage in 1832, 1833, that went around the world. He visited some amazing places, and really his studies in South America, in the Galapagos Islands, and also on the mainland, finding fossils of sloths and other organisms. He realized that in order for evolution to work, he needed lots of time. Because during this time, remember, Earth was considered to be only about 6,000 years old, based on Bishop Ussher's proclamation by counting generations in the book Genesis. He figured that Earth was formed on October 23rd of 4004 BC, right? So he had it down to like 11 o'clock at night or something. But Darwin knew that for evolution to occur, it must be a long, protracted process. And so by reading this book, Principles of Geology, that was written by Charles Lyell, he champions this idea of uniformitarianism. And remember, uniformitarianism is that the processes that govern or that occur today and the rates, the laws that govern the universe have not really changed over geologic time, right? And so based on that, there's an argument, in order to make these thick formations of hundreds of feet of sedimentary rock, it must take hundreds of millions of years to form these rocks, right? So the Earth must be very old. And so uniformitarianism argues for an old Earth. And that's what Darwin needed. He couldn't fit evolution to occur in 6,000 years, but he had hundreds of millions of years, so he realized this can occur. And basically the premise to evolution is that you have traits or adaptations, right? And these are inheritable. They come from your parents. You and your siblings are not the same. You all are better at one thing or another, right? So offspring vary in their traits, right? And then natural selection, well, the nature will pick those individuals that are best adapted to that particular environment, right? So can that individual adapt to the resources available? Is that individual, will it be better able to compete for those resources, right? Will that individual do better in the warmer or drier or cooler climate, right? And will that individual do better in the environmental conditions of that climate, right? So evolution is really the traits and adaptations that are inheritable from your parents, and each offspring is slightly different than their siblings, and then nature selects those individuals that will go on to produce their own offspring, which will vary again. So evolution is a long, protracted process, and that's what Darwin realized. And so the key thing that he got from that book was element of time. I think I have a quiz question on that. Is what did Darwin get from reading Lyell's book? He got time for evolution. So let's look at some different rates of evolution. And Darwin believed in this idea of phyletic gradualism. And I think your book just calls it gradualism, but it's a slow Darwinian evolution through time. And that's what uniformitarianism gave him, right? And so in this little chart here, I have time progressing this way, and I have species diversity, right? So you start off, and it's a slow, gradual diversification over time. So as time marches on, you will get more and more diversity, right? So whereas this other competing idea is this punctuated equilibrium, and evolution occurs in these fits and starts. It may be pretty stable for a while, then suddenly there's a vast radiation. And really the best argument here is that Cambrian explosion. We had these soft-bodied organisms, and then suddenly, boom, a whole variety of organisms, right? And so some factors that control that is maybe a geological catastrophe opens up new ecological niches. Well, one example is when the dinosaurs died out, the mammals radiated like crazy because they went into those new ecological niches that were once taken by the dinosaurs. Maybe there's a sudden climate change, so some organisms will die off, others will be able to adapt to that new change. And then new environmental factors, right, that can change the environment. Like a new predator comes in and you have to compete with that new predator, right? So, and the way it looks like, again, you can see that in terms of time versus species, there's very little diversity. And then suddenly in a very short period of time, there's a bigger diversity of life, right? And these go on and then have their own diversity, right? So this is more of an example of this punctuated equilibrium. Now, one thing that we've found, just because, again, paleontologists haven't discovered all the fossils, and they haven't looked at all the beds, all the strata out there. So there is this idea of missing links, missing organisms that kind of fill in the phylogenetic tree. And what we're finding as we look more, and especially in specific rock types of certain ages for specific fossils, we're finding them. So there does seem to be a trend, or at least more evidence suggesting that phyletic gradualism may be more important than this punctuated equilibrium, because we are starting to find those missing links, right? And again, there's more work to be done. Your book ends with this section with extinction. So where large members of a species die, and there's no genetic trait that passes on, right? And the other thing about extinction, it is forever, right? No matter what Hollywood says, you're not going to be able to bring these species back. And so what factors cause extinction? There's global climate change, maybe tectonic activity, which results in like changing ocean current patterns, an asteroid impact, which is a sudden change, volcanism. Lots of volcanic activity could send gases, change the temperature, the climate of Earth. And then again, maybe a new predator or a new competitor comes into your environment, and you just can't compete with that competitor, and your species goes extinct. Other terms to think about is biodiversity. Remember, a community are many species living together. Think about the tide pools. The tide pool community of sea stars, sea urchins, barnacles, mussels, a huge community, right? And a healthy community has a large biodiversity, many organisms living together. Once you start seeing only one species take over and other species die out, so you lose that biodiversity, which means your community is not healthy, that may lead to extinction events, right? And so worldwide decrease in biodiversity and decrease in genera or species. And so those are the mass extinction events. So something's going on to kind of kill off some organisms, whereas others may adapt okay to that changing environment, right? Now, there are 5 mass extinctions that are important. And really the most important one is this end Permian one, which basically killed off about 95% of all species on Earth. So we were lucky to survive that. That occurred in the Permian Triassic. That's this one here. And then the other one is the end Cretaceous one here. And that end Cretaceous one is the one that killed off the dinosaurs, right? Here is a chart showing those mass extinctions where the number of species or genera die off over time. And we can see that the deepest and most strongest mass extinction event was a Permian Triassic mass extinction. And then you can see here's the end Cretaceous one right in here. So this is also in your book as well.